It's a go. We're recording.
Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to say it's a real privilege and it's an honor to be here tonight. I'm looking forward to speaking with you all. I want to say that I'm thankful to live and work in the traditional territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Matsqui people. So I just I was asked to come and talk about High Water, my book. It's a book that I wrote it was published in 2006, so it's been out for a while. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done since then as well. A lot of it has been tied to the Fraser in some way. So it's been really interesting to be able to kind of work with the Fraser through all these years. So it'll be a bit of an eclectic talk. I want to show you a little bit about what I've been working on. It's a bit of a show and tell. So this will be backwards for you, but I can't help it. This is a history of the city of Surrey, which was a really interesting and fun project to put forward. I'll be talking a little bit about that because some of the research I did for this book extends the work that I did in High Water back in time as well. I'm the managing editor of BC History Magazine, so we're always looking for material. So if you have ideas, please let us know. I just finished a book with the Kwantlen Nation, which hasn't been released yet. It's called We Are Kwantlen, and it's ready to go, and we're just waiting for a time when they can gather to release it. And some work with Campbell Valley Cultural Heritage Overview, which is really interesting as well. So now those are all off my desk. So it's been just a real privilege to be able to focus on local history for such a long time. And also, I'm really excited about the possibilities of the book form. I'm really one of the lucky ones. I'm able to make my living as a writer and a researcher and as a collaborator. And I spend lots of days, while I used to, having coffee with people and listening to their stories, looking at the old folders they've got under their bed and in containers and boxes, and spending far too many hours comparing historical maps with Google Earth shots and reading documents that have been touched and held and created by people long ago. So some of you know my family. I grew up the fourth child in a family of 6 children. 5 of us were born within 7 years. So you can imagine that getting anywhere and getting home was a bit of a circus. So I always hoped that I would be overlooked for just a little while and left behind someplace in a department store. Maybe my ideal was to get left behind in Woodward's. And I knew that I would be able to go to the food floor for a snack. I'd be able to jump on the beds. I'd be able to try out all the couches and easy chairs when the store was closed. And I'd be able to spend some time just looking at all the curated collections of things that were around in the store. I really thought that would be wonderful. And when I go into any library or archives today, I still have that same feeling of wonder at the human richness and possibility that's stored there. And it's this really deep respect for the range of human experience and the possibility of human endeavor that right here nearby us that fuels my work. I've also learned how quickly knowledge is lost and how much it matters. So I'm lucky to be able to spend my time talking with people, creating evidence from story and feeling the uniqueness of each life and the paths uncharted that are now charted and taken. I'm constantly reminded of the power of stories and their limits and the way that stories can inspire action. I recently worked with an engineering firm on they were doing a dam safety analysis, and they needed they were creating a new model for peak flows and for dam in order to see what the limits on dams would be, and they wanted to make a toolkit. They realized that they hadn't for a long time looked at historical numbers, and so they asked me to look at some historical data and find ways to integrate the stories that people have had and the data that comes from the stories that people told into this kind of high level engineering study. So it's really interesting the way that nowadays stories are being used as data for even highly mathematical endeavors. So I want to do so much more than cobble together a single chronological narrative. But what is the job of a writer? The job of a writer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is really to ask people to notice things that they might not have noticed before. We want to call attention to things that are in plain view. Sometimes they just need a little bit of explanation. We want to show the world around us in new ways. So I see my slide is now out of sync, so I'm going to go back. So history is here and it's all around us. That's one of the things that I think is really critical to understanding the work that's coming out of here. We used to think that history was always elsewhere and it was about battles, but it's from here and it is made out of ordinary things, old pieces of paper, photographs, the human memory. It didn't happen in black and white as photos suggest. Life was lived in color, as we all know, but we sometimes forget. And it always has been and continues to be deeply multicultural. BC was never just a white place. And so one of the challenges of being a historian is accessing these diverse histories. And that's getting more possible each year as more people are coming forward with stories and as community museums are really making the effort to reach out to different communities. So history's here, as I've said, it's made of ordinary things. It didn't happen in black and white. So what we really tried to do when we were working on the Surrey book, which wasn't possible for the high water book because it was just in black and white, the Surrey book was full color, and we really wanted to showcase that idea of the full color. So here, for example, is a shot of the New Westminster Fire in 1898, a really beautiful postcard view. And so we took the colors out of that postcard and used it to create this color palette for the Surrey book. We also really want to show, in continuing on with that idea of color, we really wanted each opening in the Surrey book, each chapter opening had a different color behind it and a different map. There's an incredible wealth of maps, local maps in community museums and archives, and they give us a really interesting picture of the past. So we opened each chapter with a map, some voice, somebody talking, the 1930s one. Times were difficult, you know, people just didn't have any money. The 19.
You still there?
Oh, we're still there, yeah. The 1940s one was from a man called Zenasuke Inoue, and he said, "My loyalty to Canada has been well tested." He was a Japanese man that grew up in Canada, he grew up in Canada. His family farmed in Surrey. He fought at Vimy Ridge, and then he came home after the First World War, and he went back to his farm, and then he lost his farm and everything that he had in the internment of 1942. So he wrote letters. He was sent to Caslow. He wrote letters for 80 or 90 letters trying to get his land back. He eventually did get his land back. But so this was his words: "My loyalty to Canada has been well tested." So we really want to show the color there. And the other thing that is really beautiful about some of the parts that we weren't able to show in high water that in later work we have been able to show are the colors of the maps. The map on the left is an 1850 view of basically Barnston Island. It's a watercolor map, and you can see the curve of the Fraser River here, Barnston Island there. This is basically the foot of 208 Street, where the Catesy Reserve is, and Derby Reach Park is now kind of over this direction. But the maps that we were able to find and the colors of the maps, we weren't able to represent in high water, but in some subsequent books, we have been able to do that. And besides the beauty of documents, there's just incredible photos in the archive. So if we're talking about the Fraser River, here's New Westminster, early 1860s. This is a photograph that you see around looking from Brownsville. Basically, I think close to where the Brownsville pub is nowadays, if you know where that is, the foot of Old Yale Road, looking across to New Westminster of the 1860s. So the wealth of material in the archives is quite incredible. We also wanted to show in a way that we didn't show in high water, the way that history can sometimes have two things or more than one thing going on at a time. So this page is a couple of this is showing the change in the geography of First Nations people in the Fraser Valley in the 1860s and 1870s. These two photographs are gatherings at the governor's mansion. The governor believed that he was hosting a gathering of First Nations leaders who sort of supported his work, loyal citizens. First Nations leaders came from all around the Fraser Valley, 4,000 or so, and in order to do for land protests. So we had two separate things going on at one time. And these photographs show that history isn't always neat and it can't always be tied up. And so sometimes the best we can do is just get the material out on the page. Okay, and then the idea that history is multicultural and has always been multicultural here is important to note. And sometimes you just catch glimpses of it and you have to go with what you have. So this is the ferry going across from Surrey to New Westminster in the 1880s. The Captain Angus Grant is up here in the wheelhouse. We have people standing around. It's obviously staged. And then we have a Chinese man in the corner leaning up against the building. It's not that usual here yet to have these old photos with Chinese men so prominently a part of the photo. So we like to use them when we can. The Chinese Museum of BC is just getting underway. And so I anticipate in not too long from now, we'll be able to have a better archive of old photos. And the other book that needs to be written by somebody is Dogs of History, because there's so many great pictures of dogs. And so you can see there's a dog in this photograph as well. So in terms of moving to the high water, this is one of the photographs from that came out in high water. High water began, it was a project of the Dairy Industry Historical Society of BC. It began 2002 or something. It took us about 4 years to put it together. They're a small not-for-profit, a bunch of very strong, hardworking volunteers. They were able to put this book together, and it was an incredible feat. And it's a real resource for planners today because it's just a collection of material related to the Fraser River and the flooding that had never been pulled together. And it's I always call him the milkman. the Dairy Industry Historical Society, who put it together, they're really strongly believed that without material like this and without that constant updating of material, historically, it's easy to forget what happened. And so they felt that their generation of people that remembered the flood of 48 particularly and had family members of previous floods was aging out of decision making, and they wanted to make sure that that decision making capability and that understanding of the power of the Fraser River wasn't lost. So the book talks about the challenges of managing flood control infrastructure over time in a dynamic system, which is the Fraser River, and also in an equally dynamic physical and political context in a changing legislation, policy, financial commitment. It relies on all kinds of stakeholders in all levels of government to make flood infrastructure happen. So there's so much that the book can't do. And one of the men that we interviewed, his name was Buck McKay. He grew up on the banks of Maria Slough, which is just outside of Agassiz, a place that was not today's forgotten trickle of slow water, but it was a vital arm of the Fraser River, teeming with fish and bird life. His frustration was clear when I talked to him. It's nearly impossible, he reflected, to distill a lifetime of observation of the places around him, their distinctive smells, their one particular and wondrous sights, their sounds, into a single conversation with a stranger. It's impossible to capture a dense tangle of sensation and memory on a single snippet of audio tape. So despite these limitations, High Water celebrates what we can learn by talking and listening, and documents not a single truth, but conversations about the past, dialogue, negotiation, and the back and forth of ideas through time. It celebrates the astonishing collective of facts and information about our readers, about our region, housed within the lives and memories of ordinary people around us. So there's so much that it can't do. It can't capture life and get it on the page. And there's a lot that is still to be learned and has been learned since we published that. But I would ask you to notice, and one of the things I come back to is that the book really shows the work and ingenuity from people of the past, and it marks the changing perception of the values of land, certainly from 100 years ago, when agriculture and resource extraction were the values, the key values that were driving what we were doing with land, absolutely at odds with Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and also in many ways at odds with ethos, like an ecological ethos as well. Old timers said that, you know, if trees were there, they were in your way. Trees and water were our enemies, many people have said to me. So, and the other thing that the book shows is an awareness of the vulnerability and fragility of the infrastructure that we rely on all the time, every day here in the Fraser Valley, to keep our homes dry and to keep life moving forward. So it also has some beautiful photos in it. This photo that's on your screen now is the Royal City at Sumas Landing. Miller's Rock is in the background. That's from the Neil Smith collection. Miller's Rock is basically, half of it is gone now. It's on the Fraser River just behind, used to be the, I'm having a mind blank. It's just past Old Yale, just past where Yale Road crosses the highway at the Vedder Canal. So when you cross the Vedder Canal, it's not far from there. But anyways, it used to be a rock on the edge of the Fraser River that was a real mapping point. Langley Concrete is there now. That's what I was thinking of. And the Miller's Rock is essentially gone. But you can see it in the back of this photograph. And you can see the way that the steamers were, they could nose into any bank. You didn't need to have a proper landing or a wharf. You could nose in, drop down the planks and, you know, load and unload. There's a buggy on there, so you need a little bit more for that. But other pictures show people just loading by hand from there. So they were very flexible kinds of boats. So in terms of the Fraser Valley, and in 1876, this is a map of 1876, and it's really interesting to show the Fraser Valley. And the key part that's really changed about the Fraser Valley is the loss of Sumas Lake out in the east. It was a large, shallow lake. It was tied to the Fraser. It felt the pull of tides. It was a rearing ground for all kinds of things, all kinds of species. And I remember talking to an old guy who grew up just to the west of it, in Chilliwack, Glen Toop, and he was old when I talked to him around the year 2000. And he said that when he was a kid, he was a teenager when Sumas Lake was drained. He said when he was a kid, you could literally at dusk, the sky was, you know, black with birds at dawn and dusk. So he said that that's such a cliche that we hear nowadays, but that was absolutely one of his truths. And he always looked back on that as well. So you can see some of the key infrastructure that's coming in this map. I don't know how well you guys can all see this map, but I'll just be quick. Old Yale Road here's at my cursor, and you can see it extends all the way out across the Fraser Valley. This is Fort Langley area here, and the Salmon River extending to the east here. This is the Nickel going all the way through Langley City and then down to the ocean. And then a little bit to the north of that is the Serpentine. So those really important rivers, that was the keystone to life in the Fraser Valley. In the absence of roads, rivers were transportation highways. And to give a sense of the importance of the Fraser River in terms of the world, here's the tea clipper, the Thermopylae, and it's tied up at Brunette Sawmills in New Westminster in the 1890s. It ran BC lumber to China, and then brought tea home and sold tea. But one of the things I love about this photograph is, well, I like the maidenhead on the front of the boat, which is quite incredible here, but also the dimension of the lumber that we have here. It's 24 by 24 by 100, so it's a pretty good size. It's a chunk of wood that's getting loaded there. And other material that's in high water is some of the infrastructure that was happening coming into the Fraser Valley was, for example, the Mission Bridge. There's two photographs that were taken just within moments of each other. This is the construction crew of the Mission Bridge. And you can see the square, the different tools that the workers are holding. There's somebody with a chisel. There's big screwdrivers, augers. So at the same time, once these guys were done, they also took a picture of the top brass from the railway at the same point, the same day. And so that's often the one you see. And for me, it seems a lot more interesting to see what the men were carrying, what they were wearing when they were getting their picture taken, the construction crew. So if we think about the Fraser River and the flood profile of the Fraser River drains a huge portion of British Columbia. And major floods are caused by rapid snowmelt combined with rain in May and June. Historically, that has been the case. It's astonishing how much of the province the Fraser drains the watershed. And if we look at the Fraser hydrographs at Hope, it just gives you a sense of the different years that the Fraser, the high waters on the Fraser. So 1894 was a really important high water. It's still the flood of note. It's still the design flood for the Fraser Valley. 1894, it's off the chart here. I can't find my cursor. Okay, it's off the chart here. A little further down is 1948, and then 72 was further down as well. Those are the really critical ones. 1948 was really important because of the length of time that the water came up and stayed up, and that was what made the challenge for the dikes in 1948. So I just wanted to give you a sense of how high the 1894 one was, and that it's still the design flood for the Fraser Valley. So this is Mission in 1894, and the bridge across Mission is, the bridge to Matsqui is still standing, but struggling. This is downtown Chilliwack in 1894. Beautiful photo and quite a famous one. It says so much about what was going on. And one of the things that's interesting to talk about in terms of the flood, the infrastructure after 1894, was that 1894 flood really made people in BC and in the Fraser Valley sit up and take notice, because the government really wanted agriculture to survive and thrive here. And 1894 had taken out some of that confidence. They'd had, earlier settlers had floods in 76 and 82, but really 1894 shook the confidence of both government and people because it was so high and so devastating. And government was really wanting to have agriculture work in the Fraser Valley. This is an example of what they were talking about in the States. And so this angel of progress is moving across the plains of the States, pulling the railway is coming with her, the telegraph line, the settlers, and they're moving animals and Indigenous peoples off. So that was really what the ideal of the era was. It was agriculture. And so to threaten agriculture the way 1894 flood did was a serious blow to society and to kind of the culture of the Fraser Valley. And they began to think really seriously about what needed to change if we were going to make agriculture work in the Fraser Valley. And one of the things was Sumas Lake. Now, the draining of Sumas Lake, which happened in the 1920s, and was really part of that embrace of agriculture and the need and the want to have as much agricultural land as possible in the Fraser Valley, came partly out of the flood of 1894. This is one of my most favorite photographs of all time, I think. It's a beach in Sumas Lake in 1910. It's a sandy lake. It's a picnic day, and they're fanning the mosquitoes with those branches that they're holding. So the draining of Sumas Lake happened around 1921. And so the Sumas Prairie, which is what we drive across as we head east towards Chilliwack, was formerly under water. So this sort of to the east of Sumas Lake is Huntington Road. So maybe where the E is here is the north-south line, roughly. Actually, no, I've got it the wrong way. It's more like this way because north is facing that way. Yeah, and so here's some of the work that happened to make the draining possible. Nowadays, it's questionable whether that would go forward. But in its time, it was this ideal, the embrace of agriculture, as I said. And so this is a triumphant picture of haying in Sumas Prairie in 1929, so that the lake has been drained and the prairie is now able to support crops, and it still does. So if we think about the idea of water, we live near the Fraser River. It's an everyday part of our lives, and we cross it and recross it every day. I am constantly surprised by the volume of water, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what rivers mean to us. And today, especially in a time when most of us have turned our backs on the Fraser and see it as an impediment, it's something to go over, something that's in the way. And that's a different time, different now to in the past, when most people had what old timers called water consciousness and a much more intimate everyday relationship with water. The Fraser River was a link up and down the valley and the locus of community points of connection. So it was a really important place. And the fear of flooding was real and continues to be. So if we look now at the flood of 1894 or 1948, we can see it's not as high as 1894. It's this brown line. But to show the scope of the flood of 48, we can see this, for example, this photograph looking southeast from Mission, June 5th, 1948. When I was working on high water, I went to the Ministry of Environment, and they dug around and they had this pile of photographs, and they said, oh, I don't know if these are going to be any use to you, but there are these aerial photos of the Fraser Valley that have been taken on June 5th, 1948. So we can see here, this is Matsqui Island. This is Matsqui over here to the north, or not to the north, to the top of the screen. And you can see the line of the railway running across the center here. And this is what's called the Matsqui Break. So that's an important piece of that let water all up into the north of Matsqui. But these photographs are quite beautiful. Here's another one looking west over Nacoman Island to Mission and Matsqui. So we're looking west. This is at the top here. This is Matsqui here. Matsqui is completely flooded. And just at the top, we are coming towards Glen Valley, which was also flooded. This is the scope of the devastation of the flood of 1948. No rail could get into the valley, in or out of the valley. So the valley was basically cut off for quite a long period of time. The flood of 48 was important in that not just the scope of the devastation, but also it's a real point in community memory. People remember it very differently. Many people remember it very fondly. This is a lovely photograph of, this is out on top of Matsqui Prairie today, what is now Matsqui Prairie today, completely inundated. And these guys had been working so hard, and David, I see I didn't capitalize his name, David Poignant is driving the boat, and his passenger has fallen asleep. This is Matsqui, June 1948. And if we think about Langley, Glen Valley was flooded. North from Rawlinson Crescent was all water, and Fort Langley was just a small island in a sea of water. The general in the Langley Advance, it said, the general picture of Fort Langley is one of devastation. Everywhere the water has been, vegetations and buildings show the high water marks. Trees and bushes are silvery gray. The foliage is dead, covered with a thin coat of very fine silt. It looks as though acid has been sprayed very thoroughly over the entire area. Paint has been washed off the buildings. They're either the same gray or dirty brown. The whole area smells. Some places are worse than others. At Pete McNaughton's on the west side of Fort Langley, the stench here was particularly bad. Water was still several feet deep in the barn, and around the barn, putrid mud lay up to a foot deep. A few dead fish lay about. The garden was well advanced before the flood, but it had been killed, although the water had not actually covered it. So the flood ruined homes, but also made the cleanup very difficult. So after the flood of 1948, we had the flood of 1894, we had the flood of 48. Suddenly there was a real interest in creating a much stronger infrastructure in terms of protecting the lands in the Fraser Valley. So new thinking came in. There was multiple failures of dikes throughout the Fraser Valley. And so a lot of money was put into the dikes after 1948, and different policy it was enacted to make sure that the flood infrastructure was taken care of. So there's a new Dike Maintenance Act. There was an inspector of dikes in the province of BC, and there was a setting up, there was already diking authorities, but there was a kind of a strengthening of diking authorities. So today, a lot of the dikes that are protecting people from the Fraser are run by these diking authorities. Many are local governments, but many are not. So in the lower mainland, including Squamish, there's 74 dikes and more than 30 diking authorities. Some of the diking authorities have more money than others, and some have more expertise than others. So it's a real challenge to get that evenness. Today, dikes generally do not meet current provincial standards, and none fully meet or exceed standards. There's new seismic standards as well. So what the provincial government is saying, and thinkers across Canada are saying, that we need integrated flood management that is kind of a three-part thing. There's flood protection infrastructure, there's land use management, and then there's flood preparedness, response, and recovery. And that none of these will work together. None of these will work alone, but maybe they'll work together. So if we look at the Fraser Valley, so much of the Fraser Valley that we live on is in the floodplain. The Richmond Delta areas, they're protected by sea dikes, and many areas would be underwater at just high tide. Up into the pit, there's various dikes, and through the Surrey area and the Nicomeckle and the Serpentine, those are diked, and of course along the Fraser, protecting the land. So what does integrated flood management look like? There's a combination of mitigation activities are needed, because, as diking authorities say, each has critical limitations. So there's structural flood protection works, which are primarily dikes. And we've been finding in the last 15 to 20 years especially, and particularly during COVID as well, that these large dike protection, the large dikes are being used really quite heavily for recreation. So there's a real doubling of kind of use there. There's flood hazard land use management. So this means putting houses above the flood level. And then there's there's flood preparedness and response after floods happen. So the flood management experts are saying we need all three of these, and we can't just do one, because they say if we just build dikes, it actually only encourages people to build in the floodplain. So we need to make sure that we are also building dikes and building the protection, but also putting the flood hazard land use management pieces in as well. So to discourage people from building on the floodplain or to build carefully on the floodplain. And then we need to also make sure that we are there to help when things get rough and it doesn't work. So yeah, it's a complicated business, and it's a really such a dynamic area, such a dynamic thing. As I said at the beginning, that the river is one thing, but then there's this whole range of local, municipal, provincial, and federal governments that need to work together as well. So what happened? The flood of 48 was a huge cultural moment in the Fraser Valley. It was a time that people remembered. It was a time that a lot of kids really liked because their family was off their farms. Their dad was unable to do anything much until the water went down. And so a lot of people that you spoke to who were children around 1948 said that we had so much time just as a family that it was like a moment out of time. So there's all kinds of memories of the flood of 48 that are captured in the book. The flood of 48 was near to wartime. And so there was a great group of people, reservists, who could be mobilized. And so there was a huge response to the flood of 48 that planners today think would be difficult to muster that number of people to respond today. And also today's concerns about risk management and mitigation of risk would mean that volunteers are more difficult to mobilize. And it's a different context. The other thing that old timers say is that in the 40s, their animals were used to walking, and that animals today that are, especially dairy animals that are, since there's many dairy farms on the floodplains, they're not used to walking in the same way, so they would all need to be trucked. So in 48, people opened their gates and sent their animals out and then rounded them up later. So it's interesting changes that have happened. Okay, so if we think about the future of the Fraser River, and we think about the flooding, I can't think of the future of the Fraser River without thinking about the way that we've changed the Fraser Valley over the last century. The Fraser Valley is much like much of Western Europe, Western US, the whole US, in fact, almost, that we've, as humans, changed the way that the land works in order to make it work for agriculture. And so as we're thinking about these new ways to manage the Fraser, we also are thinking about how are we going to manage species at risk? How are we going to manage the salmon? So I can't think of the future of the Fraser River without thinking of salmon. 2020 marked the lowest ever salmon returns on the Fraser. And yet at the same time, for the first time in 2 decades, because of the work of volunteers, salmon have returned to West Mundy Creek. So as we look ahead, we're always looking at this kind of double legacy. We know we need to welcome millions more people into the Fraser Valley over the next half century. So what do we need to ask of ourselves and our policymakers? And in COVID, we're living in a materially different world than we were a year ago. And us being here on Zoom is testament to that. But this new world might have something to teach us. Without the same traffic on the roads and in the air, we are offered a glimpse of a past world and a possible future at the same time. The air is cleaner here. When we go out at night, we can see the stars. We now look up if we see a plane fly over. It's unusual, right? So we've seen a revaluing of the natural world right at our doorstep and a renewing embrace of the natural world around us. People are using parks and visiting parks. I'm an optimist, but I'm hoping that we're beginning to see the end of the purely resource era and the era of consumption. And our collective belief in the abundance, the endless abundance of resources in this province. So it's possible more people are ready to do the work of making this place ready to pass on. So history teaches us that memory matters, that policy matters, and that targets matter in terms of getting things done. So whether it's building flood infrastructure after 1948 or protecting and enhancing nature, history also teaches us that people are less interested in the future of places that they haven't experienced than those that they have. They're less interested in protecting species that they don't have a personal connection to or know stories about. And this is what history teaches us about the power of story. It's really a very, it's an important thing. We need to return to that place that old timers called water consciousness. And that means teaching people what's out there right on their doorsteps that ought to be valued and cared for. It's the kind of work that is done every day of every year by people that are here on this Zoom tonight. The Langley Field Naturalists, Dr. Bippa, they promote understanding of this place and encourage people to explore it and to see its wonders. Metro Vancouver works on habitat enhancement, experience to Fraser, and educates and cultivates individual connections to creeks and rivers and wild places in the region. The Yorks and Creek Watershed Society, the Nickel and Serpentine Enhancement Societies, LEPS, everyone is working to teach people to care for what's around, in part by telling stories about what's here. So my work has really been shaped by the idea that history is here, it's all around us. It's in our neighborhoods, it's in our families, it's in our communities, and it's in the wild places that nourish and sustain us. This is such a rich history. It's multicultural, it's human, and it really matters. And it's carried in stories. It isn't a linear chronology. It's a robust and growing and interconnected fabric. It's a web of connections across human endeavor and always with roots in the natural world. We've seen a move away from the natural world in our land use practices, but we also are seeing a time when expectations are changing about the care we need to take for our natural world. So local history is an ongoing testament to courage of all kinds. And it's a reminder that we have a collective need and really a collective capacity to tackle the really big questions and challenges of this changing world. So that's pretty much it that I've got. So I've got lots of questions for you, and I'm welcome questions to me too. The one thing that I meant to say was that as a collective, and as you're working together, and as your groups are working together, what do we tell people, and also what do we ask of people as we move forward? So is there an action that we need to be asking people to do as we move forward as a group? So that's all I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was really great, Jane. Thanks.
Oh, thanks.
I've got a question. Just does in the integrated flood management planning, does anyone ever consider the idea, the notion of floodplain restoration, removing some of these dikes in areas where they could be removed possibly, or change their location so we can restore some of that area, those ecological features?
Well, I think that that's kind of an emerging field. I think you would say that that's happening, especially because it's called making room for the river. So they're finding that if they move the dikes back, they get a lot more. They can handle the influx of water and the the variable movement of water without as much trouble. Like, so they're not overtopping, or and they get the benefits of the kind of sponge effect of wetlands. They get the benefits of all the animals and bird life, and that kind of really mixed in, that mixed possibility for animals. But I think the challenge for here in Canada, or I think the reason it worked on some of the big rivers, like they're using it on parts of the Rhine and they're using it in the Netherlands, they've actually taken old dikes and moved them back like 200 meters on each side, like a long way, and then made kind of a more of an estuary. I think it's possible there because of that, the European Union and the targets that the European Union has set for wildlands. So it's like a policy framework that demands things happen. And
we're not there yet.
I don't think we're there yet, but I think we need to push. Because when you see places like this Salmon River that I love, which is, I mean, you all live near it, right? Down here on the end, is it a dead river? I mean, it's like, even in the 25 years I've lived here, it's changed a lot, right? Those are important features that we have lost and continue to lose. And thinking of the Sumas Lake, that's just an amazing thought to picture that the way it was, and the ecology and the value to the people who live there, indigenous peoples, and the wildlife. It's quite amazing. And just the way that it nurtured so many species, right? And and it was tidal because you get tides up that far, so it was just a crazy place. And also there's, well, this, Phil, but there's those remnant ridges, right, that are still there, that have like ancient species on them.
Neil Smiths.
So
great. Well, thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
I live here in Fort Langley with the Salmon River out across the fields in the backyard, and I can vouch for how tidal it is. I actually plan some of my kayak and canoeing around the tides, and I watch that tide timetable every day. Being on the west side of Raid Street, which originally was sort of pushed up at least as a makeshift dike, I'm on the wrong side if any flooding develops.
Jane, I don't know if you're aware, but I know Phil and a lot of the birders know that there was thousands of sandhill cranes that used to come into the Sumas Lake before it was drained. And they called it the Sandhill Crane Month, I think the natives did. And I know that the fellow that Miles Lamont, who's researching their cranes, he says there's only about 7 nesting pairs now in the whole Fraser Valley, where we had thousands every March that used to come down and nest in or go to that Sumas Lake.
And I've read accounts of them being in the mudflats. Would they stop in the mudflats of the Fraser?
Yes.
So I've read accounts of them being there. But I guess my question, the question that I always wrestle with is that we can think back to these places, you know, to these incredible things that were in the past, but then we are also living now, and we're like at, you know, I've heard somebody say we're like at 5 minutes to midnight, right? Like, so what are the actions, like, are there actions that we should be taking now that are realistic actions? And, you know, should our top action be education? Should our top action be like squeezing politicians? Should it be, you know, there's so many people working on so many different things, but it seems like if there was some kind of a single action that we all did, it might like make a difference. And also the other thing is, we're all about the same age here on this Zoom, but generations that are coming up behind us are very much more, they don't have to be convinced that this is important. And so, you know, do we need to harness their energy to move some of these things forward? Or, you know, because we don't want to leave it until they're in positions of influence, because it might be too late, right?
Yeah.
So I'm asking the question, what's the answer?
I think it's education,
Yeah, yeah.
because if the kids already know that, like we're doing with the nature education and the scientists are doing with nature education, you educate the youth that are coming up. They can even put pressure on their parents to change their ways while they're growing up. But once they've grown up and they're in a position of being able to make changes or take an important role in society, they will remember what they've been taught, hopefully, and take that into consideration when they make their decisions, or when they're in the important jobs. They can think back and, oh yeah, I used to really like going to hunt tadpoles in that. I'm seeing that in the generation that I was born in 1955. We didn't have very much then, and everything was pretty raw still. There was no technology, but the techno kids are not getting that. They're seeing things that are so overdeveloped and almost over-regulated. Lost touch with the earth. They've lost touch with nature. They've lost touch with the idea that the river can flood if you don't stay out of its way. Make room for the river. That's all geared to education. You have to, this history stuff has got to be taught in the schools, and then at least we're not going to, it'll be a long time to see the results of that, but at least it should be there. There's an opportunity.
Well, and I think that you know, we underestimate the power of education, and we underestimate the power of peer pressure, and we underestimate the power, how much we can change as a species, right? So it's no longer okay to smoke in a movie theater, right? It's no longer okay to throw your garbage out your car window. It's no longer okay, you know, to do a lot of things. So we have learned and we have changed as a group. And so maybe this is, you know, a possibility. You know, I don't think it's all dire, but I've been accused of being too optimistic quite a few times. So
I think Ralph has a question. Ralph?
Yeah, I'd last week Langley City put on a presentation about how they're going to develop the floodplain and through Langley City, virtually you know, cutting it in half, developing both sides of the floodplain, and in contrast to what you showed tonight, it just looks so silly. You know, like how can we be thinking like that? You know, like, taking away all that wetland and narrowing the river. If it doesn't flood in Langley, it has to flood upstream.
Mhm.
I've seen the Nickel full of water. Just who I felt like I had to scream at somebody. And I don't know who who pays attention to that.
Well, I think it's
Do we
really,
do we
yeah,
have some resource? Anyway,
I think
thanks
it's
for
really,
your presentation. It was very good.
I think it's really interesting though too, because this township of Langley is just talking about a climate change, a large kind of a climate change package that they want, people want to pass. And part of that would be targets, right? So that seems to me hopeful if it goes through, and if there are targets, and if those targets are mandated. So comparing to work that I did in Surrey, Surrey has a sustainability charter that they take very seriously, and anything that goes to council, you need to report out on the sustainability charter. So you cannot take anything forward to council without saying how it addresses and furthers the sustainability charter. And it's a big fat document that covers a lot of aspects of life in terms of communities, but also natural, like ecology, but also community health as well. So, but it's just a different way of doing things, right? You cannot come to council unless you are furthering the work of the sustainability charter. So, I mean, maybe that's the kind of measurement that we need to do here. It's tough questions with no answers that are clear.
Although I do think in this pandemic, people are becoming more and more aware of the environment because they're going out to the local parks for walking.
Mhm.
And I do think that our metro parks do a good job of relaying information about that. And thank God we have our metro parks, I think.
And visitation has gone up considerably in metro parks. Yeah, and in all parks, right? But also the pandemic has meant, as I said, you can go out and you can see the stars clearly in my house, and that wasn't always the case. So I think that, we're seeing some of the effects of less traffic, and it might be just a pause for people to think about what's possible.
If the 1894 flood was bigger than the 1948 flood, it must have flooded even more. It must have been really a big flood.
It was a really big flood, and also there was little infrastructure in place. So for 1894, there was, if you were a farmer, you would put up your own dike. There was nothing kind of coordinated. So, but the old timers say that after 94, that water consciousness, there was like 2 generations, and that water consciousness left. And then by the time 48 came, the dikes that had been built in the earlier part of the 20th century now had some trees growing on them, some muskrats living in them. And so they weren't doing their job just because people were taking them for granted. And also emergency planners say that it's hard to get people to take emergencies seriously if you don't have any regular emergencies, right? So they're talking about the instance I'm thinking of was the flooding of the Nooksack River into the back of Sumas Prairie. And that happened a couple times, and they, local residents got together and said, if this happens, what are we going to do? And they, for 5 or 6 years, met regularly and figured out how to evacuate, how to do this and how to do that. But then if it doesn't happen, people kind of lose interest. And so it's hard to keep that, not fear, but that just awareness of the possibility of nature, right? The power of nature. And now people are talking about climate change and sea level rise. They're starting to think about it in Surrey and in Richmond, for example, in some of their planning. But it's a pretty difficult thing to know exactly what's going to happen, right? So you need to have plans, but they can't be too firm. So it's a challenge.
Any more questions for Jane? Nope. Well, thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you all for
You,
coming.
yeah,
Thank
very good. Interesting. That river is right beside us here, and it's a big, big, big river.
And it's so beautiful,
Yes, it
and
is.
in all its moods. And the other day we're out, it looked like Antarctica out there. There
Oh, yeah.
was ice that had broken off and
Yeah.
to come down, so it's worth taking care of.
Yeah, I was out there yesterday, and there was ice floating down the river. Yeah.
So take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Jane.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jane.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.